Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. We are coming to you live here, the team at Virginia Works, VEDP, the Virginia Chamber, and the Virginia Office of Education Economics. We are going to wait just a second to make sure everybody is logged in, and then we will start promptly here in just a minute. Okay. Looks like we've got a good number of folks who have joined us. Fantastic. Well, again, welcome everyone to our employer-focused webinar today, Data Talks, Economic Insights for Your Business. We have a fantastic presentation for you today. We are pleased to be joined by Wendy Kong, who is the Executive Director of the Virginia Office of Education Economics, which works in conjunction with the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. Wendy has been here in Virginia for over 25 years. She's got a variety of experience in education, economic development, and also workforce development. And she's going to give you a fantastic interactive presentation today. Just wanted to make sure everybody knows we're going to be recording today's session so that if you want to go back and reference any of the information, or ideally, if you want to share this presentation or this information with colleagues or other industry professionals that you know, you can do so. Today's webinar will live on Virginia Works YouTube channel, so you can always find it. And with that, Wendy, I would love to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, just really thrilled at the partnership with VEDP and the Virginia Chamber that's been able to enable this webinar series.
Thank you, Angela, and we're really excited to be here today. We are going to talk to you a little bit about more of the workforce landscape and what we're seeing in terms of business demand, labor supply, and skills gap. And we're excited to try to provide a little bit of a high-level overview of what we're seeing that's happening in Virginia, talk to you a little bit about the differences we're seeing with supply, demand, some shortage areas, and then talk about what Virginia is doing about that. And then towards the end, we'll also do a little bit of a display of some of the Virginia Office of Education Economics VOEE dashboards that we've created that can also give you access to deeper knowledge in different areas that we've identified. So we're really looking forward to making this interactive. Feel free to put comments in the chat for us as we're going through this, and we'll try to answer them as we go along. So to get started, as I mentioned, we're going to kind of walk through these different areas that we have and do a little bit of a demonstration towards the end based on the time we have. And what we want to do is get a little bit of an understanding of who we have online today. And so if you are participating, at the top of the screen, you'll see menti.com. If you use your phone or your computer, you can log in there and enter the code that's listed at the top. And if you can just indicate for us if you are either an employer, an academic institution, a workforce group, or other, then that'll just give us a little bit of an idea of who we have participating today. So the menti.com, and then the code is 85659409, and we'll have 2 more questions for you after that. So this will be a little bit of a test of finding out if everyone's logged in. Thank you, Angela, for putting those in there for us. Great. So it looks like we've got, about half, if not more, and this will probably keep coming in, of employers that are joining, but we also have some academic institutions as well as workforce groups. And we'll be able to share some different insights that we're seeing for each of these different audiences, but this is also helpful for us to know that. Also, I see some folks putting some information in the chats too, so that's helpful to see there. All right, I'm going to move to our next question, and we'll have 2 questions for this. So because we're really trying to think about our workforce, our labor shortages and all of that, we want to ask you, have you experienced a challenge in hiring over the last year? And if you're not a direct employer and you work in an academic or a workforce institution, you can answer that based on how what you've heard is happening with either your students or the clients that you're serving. Okay, good. Helpful to hear. So it looks like we've got quite a few saying yes. Someone somewhat depends. I've got a second question here, and maybe this is where you'll be able to say why somewhat depends, because we do know that it sometimes depends on what's happening in terms of the type of person you're looking for. So the next question I want to ask you is if you had a challenge with hiring, or even somewhat, was it due to low applicants, so you just really didn't get the applicant pool? Or is it that the people that you had that applied, they just were not qualified? So, you still had a pretty good pool, but they weren't meeting the qualifications that you needed. This is helpful. Yeah. So, we're going to talk a little bit about both in terms of we are starting to see kind of a shortage of workers overall, but also sometimes we see that there are areas where we have enough workers, but sometimes the skills are not matching up. And so that's probably we're seeing both. And again, that probably is happening depending on the sector and what you're doing, and what the types of people that you're serving. Well, thank you. We're going to have a few questions or one more question for you towards the end, but thank you for participating in the Menti. So if you have it up on your phone, please keep that there because we'll have one more question towards the end to help us think about those dashboards. But moving into the presentation, just to tell you a little bit about who VOEE is, the Virginia Office of Education Economics. We are a fairly newer office. This was established in 2021 in the Code of Virginia. We are part of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, but we have some slightly different responsibilities. And one of our charges is really to look at how can we leverage data to inform education programming, policy, and workforce partnerships across the Commonwealth. So how can we look at both what's happening in the education sector and the labor market, and what do we need to be thinking about of how to better align the two? And the ways and tools that we're doing that is, looking at the data and to provide some uniform, consistent sources of data, and we're going to talk about those at the end, but also to foster collaborations, to look at ways that we can translate findings, so talking to people like you today, but also there's some other projects that we'll be working on in the coming year to really focus on that step of how do we translate that to the community? How can that change practice? So let's jump into business demand and what we're seeing so far. And again, this is more high level. We actually have data that's available by region for what we're seeing for demand. But if we look at business demand in terms of the top occupations for growth that are projected for growth in the coming, the next 5 years, and we are going to have some updated data on projected growth in the coming month, but the current projections for bachelor's degrees we're seeing, and this is growth, so jobs that are looking to expand, software developers, general and operations managers, nurses, something we know about. I'm going to talk about that in a minute when we get back to shortages, post-secondary teachers. In the middle skill area, this is more of like either associate's degree or some college, no degree certificate type programs. Medical assistants, truck drivers, nursing assistants, and dental assistants are some other ones that we're seeing. And then the largest actual one is more in that high school area of home health and personal care aides. That's the one that projected with the largest growth. We know we have an aging population, so some of these projections are really trying to think about what's going to be needed. And so this is sometimes helpful when we think about where are we going to see some trends. This is based on Bureau of Labor Statistics data based on past history of what's been happening, what they're projecting moving forward. And this is for Virginia. But I do want to note that projections are projections, and there's a lot of words on this page. I'll just quickly talk about a few highlights, is that while we have labor market projections, we also know that there are things happening in real time that projections just can't capture. Many of you may be familiar with what's happening at the federal government where we've had layoffs, and so those projections aren't capturing that. Or we also had some recent announcements of companies such as the Eli Lilly and the AstraZeneca. Projections are kind of based on historic, but it's always important to think about, we want to talk about demand that we can use the projections as a component of it, but we also want to look at what's happening, what are we hearing? And a lot of people who are working in economic development and workforce development in the business can say, that's a little different than what I've heard. And that's where these conversations are important. So, Secretary of Finance, we've heard that there's been some job change and that we've had a decline, that we had growth in the private sector, but less in the government sector, knowing we had those layoffs. We also look at our payroll has still increased since last year, and that our sectors that have the most change is business and professional services decline. We also knew the federal contractors were kind of, as part of that, also experiencing less business. So again, main piece of this is just to think about what's happening in comparison to what we see with projections and what's happening in real time. Let's talk a little bit about supply. So we know where there's some demand and what's happening out there, but also what do we think about supply and where are we seeing gaps? So when we talk about just overall supply, we often think of what is the pool of eligible workers. And what this slide here provides is what the pool of eligible workers is based on the percentage of the population that's actively participating in the labor force. If you look at this slide here, the light blue line is Virginia and the dark blue line is the US. So Virginia typically has higher labor force participation rates than overall than the US, which is good news. But if you look at the last year to the far right, Virginia's had a deeper decline than the US, and we are starting to see less labor force participation. And if you look at just that tail end for 2025, we haven't seen as low of a labor force participation at about a little less than 65% since 2016. So we're starting to see that lower, and that is actually the lowest. 2016 was the lowest labor force participation rate. So we're starting to see less people participate in the labor force in Virginia. In addition, the second slide is also something that you're going to see these squiggly lines. So I'll explain a little bit of what this means here. So the top line is job openings. The bottom line is unemployed workers. So in May, we had 251,000 job openings listed. We had only 160,000 workers who are listed as unemployed. So these are people actively looking for work. So if you think about that, when that light blue line is higher than the dark blue lines, even if all the people who are actively looking for work were filling all of those job openings, if you do the math on that, it's still 90,000 job openings that would still be unavailable. And that's if all the workers who are looking for work were actually perfectly lined up with those job openings, which we know isn't always the case. So if you kind of look at that light blue line being above the dark blue line, since about 2016 in the middle of the slide, we've really seen this kind of macro level of having more openings than workers available. Now that is different by sector, but it's very different than what you see in the 10 to 15 years prior, where you would always have a pretty large pool. So when we were asking that question earlier about, number of workers, we used to have a lot more workers applying for jobs because we had more openings or more workers than openings. So it was kind of a tighter market. So what we're seeing in the last 10 years is really that it's it can be more of an employee driven market, and that employers are needing to get creative about how to recruit the top talent that they need. And I'll talk a little bit about some strategies that we're seeing there. In fact, one other thing I do want to mention that is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is the one that's been tracking this, and they do this, and they've categorized Virginia as a more severe state in terms of worker shortages. So they actually have a graphic of states across the country, and I think Virginia is among 13 in terms of that more severe states for shortages. So why are we kind of seeing less labor force participation? This worker shortage piece is some of it is the early retirements and the aging workforce. So the labor force participation rate goes to up to I think 85 years of age. So as we see more workers retiring, then we're going to have less participation. And we know that we have a heavier amount of the population and the older workforce area, and that we do not have the amount that are replacing, the birth rates are not replacing the ones that are aging out of the workforce. So that's starting to create this shortage. And we know that certain sectors have been impacted more than other. We actually have some data sets that can show you the percent of workers that are over age 55 in certain sectors. So you can kind of start to gauge which sectors are more at risk for higher retirements. The other factor that we've been starting to see is the access to childcare. As childcare has become more expensive, the cost benefit analysis to being in the workforce versus paying for childcare makes it more difficult for people in these middle skill jobs to be able to go to work. And also there's just geographic limitations. So while we may have had layoffs up in Northern Virginia and we have more of the workforce available, some of the jobs may be located in Richmond or in Southwest Virginia, at which point those two don't match up when we look at it for the whole state. And then the last one is just long leading times for training. I mentioned nursing. We have a shortage in nursing, but it can take, you know, up to 4 years to get that nursing degree. So even if you think about a shortage now, investments and changes need to be made, but those can take, you know, time to even start to see the results to improve that. So again, there's a lot of different factors that are happening out there. And this is based on data that we've read from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Bipartisan Policy Center that's been really thinking about workforce issues across the country. So I talked a little bit about the you know, kind of overall labor force and what we have available. But we also want to talk about when you mentioned, you know, sometimes you have individuals that are applying, but the skills are not lining up. And so one thing we want to note, and this is always a fun question to ask if you haven't heard it before, but the top 5 majors by degree, and this is not unique to Virginia. Psychology is typically the #1 major in many states, if not in the top 3. And so for Virginia, this is based on their number of graduates last year. Psychology major was the top major. And then we had business administration. So when I showed at the beginning the growth of things, we had several in the business area. So that seems to line up. Computer and information sciences, we had software developers there. And biology is another one. And I'll come to you back to this in a little bit of time about what we're seeing happens with these types of graduates. And then registered nursing. So it's good to see that it's a top degree, knowing we have a lot of demand for nurses. So one thing I want to note with this is some degrees don't always line up well with an occupation. Psychology is one of them, and I'll provide a little data on that. And then sometimes a degree does perfectly align and we still see a shortage. For example, if you recall, I think we had a projected growth of about 4,000 for nursing, and we were only seeing about 2,300 graduates last year. So we already know that there could be a potential gap in terms of nursing there. So I mentioned psychology majors, and so you say, well, what are they doing and what's happening? And so when we talk about the fact that we're going to have maybe less workers available and that we need to really think about how do we attract people into jobs, we had actually, VOEE had put together a longitudinal data set of over 640,000 graduates to see what happens to those individuals with these majors and what occupations are they going into. And it was a longitudinal review, and it matched it with social media profiles to know where they were headed. There's a lot of different lines on this chart, but what's helpful to look at is when we say, what does it psychology majors do? We see that one of the top things they're going into, which is in the top right here, is that they are going into counseling and social worker type of jobs. So sometimes they're doing the psychology to get to the master's degree. And that's actually an area where we're seeing growth and we're seeing jobs needing to be filled in the mental health space. The second one, which is really interesting, was business operations and specialists. And we saw them that they were going into HR and to other management. And so when we kind of talked about earlier of less workers available, one thing for businesses that they could consider is, how are you recruiting? Maybe there is a pool of workforce that might not be coming from the specific degrees you may be thinking of, but maybe the psychology majors are a pool of workers that could be one that fits well, especially in the HR areas. We also saw them in other management occupations, different titles that were playing in there, and even in some of the computer occupations. So we've seen where these individuals are going into different types of occupations moving across. And so that's where that skills alignment, even if the degree is not lining up, looking at kind of skills-based hiring is something we're starting to see some trends in where employers are getting creative about that. And then in reverse, one other thing we thought about is when we look at, we can do it for what graduates are going into what occupations, but we can also look back at what occupations, what majors did they come from. So again, that longitudinal study, we looked at software developers and programmers, and we said, what degrees did they have? And we saw that the graduates that were coming from in the software was, while we saw computer and information science services at 34%, we also saw students who are graduating with engineering degrees also going into computer sciences. So that's another untapped potential degree that you could be looking at it for employers. And we can show you the links to these dashboards after to be able to kind of look through those. So what can we consider kind of moving forward in terms of how do we address these challenges? And I want to kind of highlight a few different considerations we're seeing from national literature, and then also talk about what Virginia is trying to do about this in terms of some statewide policies as well. So one thing that we're hearing about how to address labor challenges is really thinking about improvement of non-completion. You know, we see a lot of students who don't complete a degree. How can we get them more credentials? And states are really starting to think about that. And looking at increased completion of non-degree programs, because we're seeing, as I mentioned earlier, you saw the biggest growth was in those things that did not require a bachelor's degree. What type of training do we need to invest in that really doesn't necessarily need somebody to go back to college and go for 4 years? And then also the expansion of apprenticeship and work-based learning programs to help better connect students to the workforce. And we know that Virginia Works is doing a lot on the expansion of apprenticeships. We know it's a great model in Europe, and how can we think about that? And states are doing that, as well as these work-based learning programs. So as students are attending college, how can we get them connected to employers? Because we think that's a great talent and attraction recruitment effort. We have seen a lot of students who graduate Virginia and then they leave. And so how can we keep them there? And one of the strategies we think of is is having an internship program. We also are thinking of this talent attraction and retention of workers, and how can states attract more individuals to Virginia? And I've got a few on this next slide of what we're doing. How can we retain graduates? Like I said, we do see students that are leaving. And then thinking about this skills-based hiring. And then also, what can we think about worker retention and supports, knowing that we have workers who may have barriers to being able to stay in their job. And one of those things that we've seen nationally in the literature is how can you be creative about providing increased access to affordable childcare, whether that's at a state level or even employers really thinking creatively so that they can retain their employees. And then, of course, leveraging automation. And I think I just saw a note in the chat about asking about this with AI. And I'll talk about a little bit of that one in a minute, but you know, there is an opportunity to leverage automation, and whether that's AI or just advancements in technology that could help augment the workforce and help address dealing with shortages. It also could hopefully potentially raise productivity. We do know there's concerns over job loss, and we have looked at certain sectors that could be impacted the most by that. And to respond to that question on AI, you know, the literature right now seems to be mixed, and it really does depend on that. We're, of course, hearing more about AI impacts on software developers, knowing that software can start to help with that. But we've also seen that there's increased interest in having more AI, you know, being able to use ChatGPT or other things to be able to leverage it. That's also still creating demand. And even if we do have AI helping in, for example, the software developers, we're still going to need those software developers to help manage that and to be able to keep up with the technology. But we may need less. We knew we kind of had a shortage with them earlier. So again, I think there's multiple factors when we think about AI that could be impacting them, and they may be sector specific. For example, we've heard in healthcare that AI can help with certain shortages because there's technology that can provide assistance or even increase the quality of care if they're able to leverage the technology to be able to help provide more of the bedside assistance. So it seems like right now the impacts are sector specific and mixed reviews. And sometimes we're seeing the literature also saying that it depends, that some of it's changing so quickly that it's being hard to predict. And so there's just, I think, a lot of constant interest in terms of keeping up to date with the sectors to talk about it. I mentioned kind of what are we doing in Virginia to think about this, knowing we've got this broad shortage, labor shortage that's been occurring over the last 10 years. We don't always have skills that line up, and how can we kind of work on this? So Virginia's done a couple of things that have really started to help increase this focus on talent development and attraction and recruitment. One is that we really have set a vision for retaining talent and focusing on talent. We really feel like this is an asset for Virginia. We're usually ranked in the top 6 in terms of educational attainment, but that means beyond just a bachelor's degree, in terms of everyone having some sort of post-secondary credential and being able to address workforce needs. But, for the first time, we're really starting to see alignment between what Virginia Works is doing, the Economic Development Partnership, the State Council of Higher Education, the Chamber of Commerce, to say we really need to focus on talent. And that's the first we've seen in terms of everyone really coming together to see this is Virginia's asset and this is what we need to do next. So we're aligning strategy. We're also seeing that at a regional level and regional focus with Go Virginia regions as well as workforce units. We're also really focused on credential alignment and how can we look at what is the high demand. I mentioned these high demand occupations. We have dashboards that are available for high demand occupation lists. So how can we look at the alignment of those two things? We are doing that across both CTE programs in K-12. The community colleges are doing that for their Fast Forward program, and they have to align those credentials to that, the ones that they're offering that are at 2/3 the cost for students. And with states made investments in that area, as well as the G3 program, which is a kind of a free community college for students enrolled in high demand CTE type programs, career and technical education. We also know that there's a strong interest to align the programs that are being offered by our workforce partners in these areas to help meet workforce needs. And that's, I mentioned earlier, the increased focus on registered apprenticeships. We've also looked at other structural issues. So, before, I think it's now 5 years that we've had a Secretary of Labor, but before that, we didn't have a person that was just focused on labor market needs. It was under the Secretary of Commerce and Trade. And by having that role that is just focused on labor, we're really able to think about how do we meet the needs of employers with our workforce. And then also we've created VOEE to really look at this using data. And there's other entities like Weldon Cooper Center, as well as Strata Foundation, and even the Federal Reserve starting to really do a lot more research in this area. So we're looking at how can we leverage data and help inform policy and practice. And I do want to note some targeted investments Virginia has made to really think about these things. I mentioned the Fast Forward program. This is that non-degree credentials, industry-based credentials. The state's currently investing $23 million a year to help support and offset the cost of those programs. I mentioned that G3, the free or discounted tuition. That's a $34 million investment a year. We also had that Tech Talent Investment Partnership Program that was actually to attract computer science degrees as part of the Amazon H2Q. And we're kind of really trying to think about what strategies that could be sector specific could we do that could help better with better alignment. The other one is innovative internship programs. There's been a big state investment to really think about how to connect students while they're in college to employers. We think this is a win-win for both students and employers. For employers, this is an early attraction of talent and a way to use that as a recruitment and retention tool. We have found that students who are interns are more likely to be retained with the employer after. So it's an ROI for both the student as well as the employer. And then I mentioned the early childhood as a barrier. The state has made significant investments on top of what's been invested by the federal government in early childhood to help offset childcare for low-income workers, and that's about $460 million as of this fiscal year. Of course, we've had other regional investments and industry-specific investments that we've had. So the state's continuing to do a lot. It's one of the main things we wanted to kind of convey, and that, again, we're really thinking about this across all the agencies. So I'm going to pause and see if there's anything in the chat before we jump into our next component of this, and see if I can answer any questions. And I will ask also Angela if there's anything I have missed that has come up that I may not be able to see as I'm looking through this.
Yeah, I think, Wendy, there is a question about maybe accounting for some of the flex jobs back when you were looking at some of the stats. So, jobs like Uber or Lyft or on demand.
Yeah, those are harder to capture, and often we hear that they're kind of filling gaps for things. And I think there's been an interest to try to better capture that data in terms of knowing what in terms of accounting for the workforce that's participating in it, and then also knowing the contributions they have and if we're seeing those in the demand data. So that's a good question and something we can look into.
Yeah. So David, thank you for that question. That was a question from David Abernathy. And then there was another question regarding the use of AI to filter resumes and whether or not that might be having an impact on the availability of qualified workers.
Yeah, that's an interesting question on terms
the perception of, I'm sorry.
Yeah, of course, that's a really good point in terms of whether they're filtering out certain ones. And I know when we're looking, it's like always make sure you have those keywords. I think we'd have to look and see what data sources there are to figure out if there is something that's happening. Of course, I think that's where it's incumbent upon our workforce agencies when they're helping with workers getting jobs, of making sure that they have those right keywords, as well as companies making sure that they haven't made too much limitation that it sorts out somebody. So that's something to probably consider in terms of making sure you don't have unintended consequences of using AI.
And actually, Wendy, if you don't mind, I'll take one of the questions regarding the promotion of skilled trades. And if what I would say to that is that is one of the hot topics being discussed in many workforce circles today. And we are really seeing a resurgence of interest in not just skilled trades, but in registered apprenticeship for even non-traditional functions. So for example, many people, when you hear the word registered apprenticeship, you think carpenters, plumbers, sheet metal construction. But today there are healthcare apprenticeships, there are finance apprenticeships, there are HR registered apprenticeships, all of them with the same rigor around a developed work process, related technical instruction, on-the-job training, progressive wage growth, all the factors of registered apprenticeship, culminating in that nationally recognized credential. And so many of the grants that you were seeing being offered to help workforce challenges include a registered apprenticeship component. And so again, a lot of good conversations with our K through 12 and our community college system, and also our colleges around all training and post-secondary opportunities that don't necessarily include a four-year degree. So feel free to reach out to me. My email's in the chat if you want some more information on how Virginia Works is leaning in there. So thank you for that question. I think that came from John. Thank you, John.
And I will say the state's investments in the Fast Forward and the industry-based credentials was a leader, and I think other states really have looked to see how they can do that, because it was a void in terms of the skilled trade investments that didn't really meet a degree requirement. And so those investments to really look at skilled trades has been an important aspect, I think, across the state. I'm kind of scanning through a few other things, and hopefully I'll pick up on them. A question about advertised job postings. The projections are based on BLS with their labor market projections, and it's based on kind of typical postings, not postings, excuse me, employer surveys and how they work on their projections. I will default, and Anya's going to pick it up in a minute, on whether the postings data doesn't usually factor into job postings. And the job openings data, I believe, is also not really looking as much at job postings as much as it's using the employer survey data. But I don't want to misspeak on that, so I'll ask if Anya can clarify for me, and she's going to be walking us through our dashboards in a minute. One other thing is the note on older workers and the age bias. This is a really interesting topic. I was just reading an article on that, and I can't remember. OECD, I always forget it because it's a French term. They're an international group that's been looking at this issue in terms of the aging workforce, because it's not just hitting the US, it's hitting internationally as well. And they've been trying to really think of strategies to overcome kind of the aging workforce. They did talk a lot about kind of upskilling for older workers, and we see very low participation rates of workers looking to upskill that are age 55 and older. I don't think that's a full answer. I do think that employers do need to kind of think creatively about it, or also thinking as people retire, can they come back part-time to help backfill jobs or help with bridging some of those things? So I'm not sure that fully answers it, but it is something that's a growing topic, and some research is starting to happen out in that area, because I think it's an area of, when we have less workers available, how do we continue to engage a workforce that's retired or is considering retiring?
Say, Wendy, I might even add to that, Virginia Works is leaning in there too. We just recently had some grant opportunities issued for what we're calling returnships. And so these are folks who maybe they were out of the office out of the workforce for a year or two, caring for a parent or a small child, or somebody whose traditional a job was interrupted or is they were laid off, for example, and thinking about how we can, to your point, upskill them and bring them back into the workforce and show the value that they have for those years of work experience. So more to come from Virginia Works on that front. Thank you for that question.
And I see one more comment about V3, and yes, that's a very good point. Knowing we have such a high veterans population in Virginia, tapping into veterans who are potentially leaving the military is a great source of individuals who are very interested and willing to work, and we love that they want to locate here in Virginia. So good point there. Okay, I mentioned we would have another question for you with Mentimeter, so if you still have that up. We've had a bit of discussion about high demand occupations. We also have some trends in job growth and production. We've been talking about degree production and where those are. And then labor market and job posting. So I'll ask you kind of say, what do you most want to know more about? And we're going to do a dashboard kind of walkthrough on this. And then if we have time, we'll get to whatever else gets a high vote for that. So let people keep voting, because seems like we've got a neck and neck race on demand occupations versus job postings. Oh, looks like we're starting to have more on the job postings, but it looks like high demand's another one. All right. Well, that's good. Thank you for that input. We're going to switch over, but before I do, I just want to note we do have a few dashboards that are available that I was just having you vote on so we could see which one, but we have links as we send the slides out after. There are hyperlinks to those dashboards to talk to you about what's going on in those. And one is our high demand dashboard, where you can look up demand by different degree levels and by region. We have our job postings analytics, which it looks like that was the one that won in terms of a demo. So we'll talk about that, which talks about trends in job postings based on what we're seeing. And then also our education and alignment dashboard, which also includes kind of demand, but also you can see degree programs that are being offered. So with that, I am going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn this over to Anya Apadaya on my team, who is going to kind of walk through the job postings and analytics dashboard.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. As Wendy mentioned, my name is Anya Apadaya. I'm a research analyst at the Virginia Office of Education Economics, and I'm going to be taking you all through a dashboard. And thank you for your feedback and your opinions on our Mentimeter questions, because those are going to be super useful in informing how I share the dashboards with you. So I think if I remember correctly, people were interested in learning more about the job market, labor market, and job posting, which is very exciting. We love to talk about that. And that actually helps to address that one question that we had earlier about job openings and job postings. So before we get started into the dashboard, I'll kind of just give a brief overview about the differences. So job openings are what was primarily focused on during Wendy's presentation, and that chart with the number of unemployed individuals in Virginia and job openings, that's going to focus on those BLS projections. So actually surveying companies and asking at the end of the month, how many openings do you actively have right now? Conversely, another way that we can measure what the labor market is looking like and job demand is by looking at job postings. And so that's actually going to be the things that you see on Indeed or LinkedIn, or ZipRecruiter, etc. And exactly to the point of an individual in the chat, it's important to remember that job postings are an imperfect source of data. And, sometimes companies will post something and it doesn't end up, getting hired. Sometimes one posting is used to hire 5 or 10 or 15 individuals. So it's just really important to keep those things in mind when we talk about it. But I do think this is a very fascinating dashboard tool that I personally use in my work a lot. And I'm sure at the end of this presentation, you all will be interested to use it as well. So this is our Job Postings Analytics Explorer, and this is a look at the dashboard. And essentially what it does is it's a tool that allows you to analyze and categorize real online job postings that are being posted, on any of those websites that I mentioned. So we can actually understand what are companies looking for? What are the skills that companies are looking for in a particular occupation, in a region, or in an industry? And it's just another way to look at the labor market, and perhaps a more dynamic way to look at the labor market when we know that the traditional projection data sometimes comes with a lag, so it can come a few months after the period that you want to look at. And of course, we know that there can be delays like we're experiencing right now with some occupational projection data. So if you take a look at the dashboard, you can see that we have different filtering options. And this is something that we have in a lot of our dashboards, actually all of them. And it's meant to help answer your questions as specifically as possible. So we can look at statewide job postings data, but we can also filter it for a number of different regions in different ways. For example, we can look at different Go Virginia regions or local workforce development area regions. But I'm going to keep it at the state level right now, just because I want to make sure that we can get as many data points as possible to show you all. Another way that we can filter our job postings data is by looking at occupational groups. And so what an occupational group is it functions pretty similarly to an industry. So if I click on this arrow right here, you're going to see a bunch of different, very broad categories in the workforce. And so essentially, if I select one of these, for example, I heard some talk in the chat about the IT sector, so I'm going to select information technology. You can see that the dashboard shifted a little bit, and that's because now we're looking at all job postings within the past year that deal with jobs related to information technology. You can also filter that a little bit more if you want to. So for example, if there's a specific subsector or a specific area of the IT industry you're interested in looking at, we have the opportunity to do that here. And it will just make your results more narrow. But again, I'm just going to go back to include all of them so we can get a more broad look at the labor market. We can also filter by the education level that's advertised. So as we know, job postings can differ greatly based on the individual that they are targeted to. So you can look at different educational thresholds You can also look specifically at internship job postings. I know that was something that we mentioned during this presentation and something that was brought up in the chat. And then we also have the ability to filter out staffing companies or look specifically at staffing companies as well. But just taking a very broad view, if we scroll down, I'm now going to dive into the data with you all. We can see that in Virginia right now, with the past 12 months, these are the top industries that are being advertised via job postings. We also have top companies such as Amazon, Capital One, and HCA Healthcare. And when you hover over them, you can actually see the individual numbers of job postings associated with any one of those bars. You're able to look at the top job titles as well. And then I'll also point out these two boxes over here. So posting intensity. What this number essentially means is a higher posting intensity basically means that an employer is being more intense in their search for a job. So they are posting this job multiple times across multiple job boards as well, which can also be a signal of demand if they're looking for talent very strenuously, intensely. And then we have median posting duration as well, which can also be used to kind of understand demand if jobs are being left online. For a shorter term, maybe they're being filled more easily, or if they're left longer, it could be that these jobs are having a hard time receiving qualified applicants or enough applicants. And then this bottom row right here is going to be really interesting as well. This is going to be giving you information about the top certifications and skills that are actually being written in those job postings. So we can actually go into those online ads and extract information. And we know that, the top certification that employers are asking for is a valid driver's license. But we can also see what are those softer skills that were mentioned. I know it's like the psychology and those soft skills of communication and writing that came up in the chat. So you can see that communication is the #1 soft common skill that's being asked in job postings. If we move on, we can see specialized skills, so things that people might receive additional education for that might be relevant to a specific job or sector, and then software skills as well. So this is an overview of our homepage, and that's going to just give you a very broad look at job postings and what's going on based on your specific filtering options. We also have another tab right here, which is going to be called Skills Trends. We'll give that a minute to load. And so this is going to take a closer look at that bottom row that you saw about certifications, skills, and software. And we're going to be able to look at declining skills, growing skills, and emerging skills. So again, you can filter, you can look specifically at the state. We can also look at different occupational groups or subgroups. And for this example, I will choose an occupational group just so you can get an idea of what the skills look like. So for example, maybe I'll choose healthcare or health science. And you can see these are the growing skills in job postings. These are the skills that are being asked for more frequently, and these are skills that may be asked for less frequently. And we can filter that based on the certification as well. So let's say when we're talking about things that people can get credentials in or qualified for additional training, you can view that by certification. You can also view that by specialized skills and software skills as well. Emerging skills differs a little bit differently. Those are going to be things that we're seeing less often, and now we're noticing are popping up a lot more frequently that weren't necessarily there before. So that can be a good way to sort of keep your finger on the pulse in terms of skills and qualifications that employers are becoming aware of and then starting to ask for more. And so I think that covers most of the job posting analytics explorer. We're going to send you out a dashboard, a PowerPoint with information and links about these, because we know that it's a lot to sort of walk through in just like 10, 15 minutes, but we hope that those links and those tutorials help you, and we are available as well to answer questions. I know I kept it very broad, looked at the dashboard in Virginia as a whole, but if you have questions about your specific industry or region, we're very excited to get to know you and talk to you and help help you understand how our tools can answer your questions.
Thank you, Anya. I'm going to switch back over to presenting now, but I think, if there's a few things that we can leave you with today is we do have some tools that are available to look at. We always say that data is a conversation starter, not an ender. It's good if you see something that looks a little different, because there's ways to also, in our minds, be able to kind of go out and keep talking with either members in your sector or your community to be able to do that. And we're interested, as part of our work, to start facilitating more of those discussions. We don't think that kind of data can kind of live on a dashboard alone and not kind of, there's always more to it once we are able to facilitate discussions in that area. And that's something we're looking to do in the coming year as we work through things. A few other projects that we're working on before we kind of close things out is knowing that there is a need to understand kind of labor market more, and some of the things we just talked about, which is really a high level. A few areas we've been really focused on is really what are the major shortages that we need to be thinking about the most. And so in the coming, in the new year, we're looking at how can we really think about shortages and what we need to do there, as well as the skills alignment. I was talking about the notion of, and we saw some comments in the chat about psychology majors, for example, and, they go into a lot of different things. So we need to think about skills, and what skills do we really need, knowing we have less workers available. And so one other thing that we've been considering working on is, how can we look at what we're seeing that skills are being taught through our programs, and what is it employers are starting to ask for, and where is there a mismatch? Sometimes it's not a new program that's needed. Maybe it's just making sure those students in any of those majors are getting these skills and being able to kind of go out and say that. So we're looking at that, whether it's going to be kind of across the board or sector specific, and trying to look more at that skills alignment versus kind of this degree major alignment that we've had, knowing that students can do a lot of different things. And I think I saw a few psychology majors even saying and attesting to that, but how do you communicate those skills that you have, because they are translatable to a lot of different areas. So those are some projects that we're planning to work on. As I mentioned, VOEE is only about 3 years old, so this is kind of our next step of VOEE 2.0. We look forward to working with you on that, and being able to come back through one of these opportunities as well to let you know what we're doing. Going back to do the slide that I had. These are links. I dropped them in the chat boxes, the chat as well. But if you have any question, this is our contact information. And we are happy to talk with different groups individually and be able to provide some assistance. And then with that, I will draw our piece to a close and turn things back over to Angela and her team, and to mention some upcoming events that you all have. And then I'll kind of scan and see if we have any last minute questions in the minutes that remain, and answer any final questions that we might have.
Well, thank you so much, Wendy. We've seen a really active chat during this webinar, so we want to thank you so much for your engagement. The questions show that this, information that you've provided has really been helpful and valuable. I've been trying to keep up with some of the other questions that have come in about workforce and workforce programs, and so just wanted to generally take a quick minute as we close this out here to remind everyone that we at Virginia Works had launched back in February an initiative called Virginia Has Jobs, and it was an effort to highlight specific industries, the major industries and large employers in the various regions of the Commonwealth. And we've been building that out with a spectrum of specialized segments in that website. So you can take a look at that by scanning the very first QR code there. You're going to see our data science page. We also have a page on AI and how you or your employees can get skilled up in using AI, not necessarily to replace certain jobs, but certainly to think about prompt engineering and AI basics and how those can be used for your business to gain efficiencies and new knowledge and new skill sets around using these new tools. schools. We also wanted to call everyone's attention to our recently released statewide economic analysis report, which is the second QR code there that you would see. And then finally, we have just a general link to the information that our website, virginiaworks.gov, provides for employer resources and some dashboards. So I've put my email in the chat a couple of times if you need direction on where to go for any other opportunities, whether it's veterans hiring, our local veteran employment representatives, perhaps our rapid response and layoff aversion opportunities. Oh, I see not able to access the second QR code. Jesse, again, I think if you can email me, I will be more than happy to send you a copy of that. Thank you so much. And maybe even Nora, I don't know if you could get a copy of that, Nora from my team, and maybe even link it in the chat. That would be great. Anyway, we will make sure that you get these resources. They are available on our websites. And so I'll put my email in the chat. But we wanted to thank everybody for being with us today, and remind you that, again, all of the the employer focused webinar series are recorded and available on Virginia Works YouTube channel. You can just search Virginia Works in YouTube, Virginia Works Official, and it will come up for you. So again, on behalf of everyone here at the Virginia Works team, on behalf of our partners at VDP and the Virginia Chamber, and certainly thank you, Wendy at VOEE. We want to thank everyone for attending today. And thank you very much, Nora, for linking in that particular report. All right, everyone, with that, we'll bring this to a close. It is 12:57. We want to be respectful of your time. We wish you all a great day, and I would be remiss. Next week is Veterans Day on the 11th, so let's all remember to not just thank a veteran, but maybe think about hiring a veteran, and keeping that process going. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.